People love clean war stories. They want heroes with perfect plans and fights that end when the music swells. They want a single moment they can point to and say, "That's when it turned." But the truth? Most of the time, it turns the way rust spreads, slow, ugly, and unstoppable, until someone puts their body in front of it and says, "Not today." I'm telling you this because you asked about courage, because you asked about that 2-day hold, because you asked about her, and because if I don't tell it right, it'll turn into the kind of story that makes people feel good without understanding what it costs. So here it is, the real version, from someone who still wakes up sometimes hearing the wind and thinking it's incoming. It started as a retreat, not the kind you admit out loud. We were operating in a stretch of broken hills and half-dead farmland that used to be somebody's home. The kind of place you can't pronounce until you've bled there. Our Allied line had been pushed hard, too hard. Enemy pressure was relentless, and the higher command finally made the call. Pull the main force back, regroup, restage, and come back with weight. Problem was, they needed time. 2 days. 48 hours doesn't sound like much until you're the one holding the door closed while someone outside tries to kick it off its hinges. We were the door. We were a SEAL platoon attached to an Allied battalion. Small unit, big responsibility. We didn't have tanks. We didn't have endless artillery. We had rifles, radios, a few drones, and a piece of terrain that mattered more than it looked like. A ridgeline overlooking a narrow valley. If the enemy took it, they'd roll straight into the regrouping lanes and turn a tactical retreat into a rout. People would die by the hundreds, maybe more, and the war would be rewritten as unavoidable. We weren't going to let that happen. We got the tasking at dusk. Our commander, Lieutenant Commander Mason Cross, stood in the field command tent with a map spread across a folding table. Outside, the sky was the color of old bruises, and you could hear vehicles moving, engines low, the sound of a force that didn't want to admit it was pulling back. Cross looked at us like he was memorizing our faces. "You hold the ridge," he said. "You buy 48 hours. Main force pulls back tonight. They return at first light on day 3. Until then, you're the line." No one asked what happened if they didn't return. You don't ask that. You just store it in your gut and keep moving. We had 9 operators on that rotation. Not all SEALs, some attached specialists, some JTAC, a comms wizard who could talk to satellites like it was a hobby. But everyone there was handpicked, because you don't send average people to do something impossible. And among us was Lieutenant Claire Morgan. Young, smart, calm in a way that made you either trust her or hate her. The kind of beauty that felt out of place in a mud-stained war zone. Not because she looked like a model, but because her face still held softness even after weeks in the field. We called her Atlas. Not because she was strong in the gym, because she carried the weight. Not on her back, on her mind. She was our tactical brain. The one who could look at a terrain feature and understand what it meant 3 hours from now. The one who could coordinate fires, drones, routes, and fallback plans in her head while the rest of us were still thinking in heartbeats. And she ran the field command post like she'd been born inside a radio net. When Cross gave the order, Atlas didn't flinch. She simply nodded and started moving pins on the map. 2 primary lanes, she said, voice even. If they push hard, they'll try the low valley first. They'll probe the ridgeline with indirect. Then they'll try to take the left shoulder to flank. Rook, our senior chief, grunted. How sure? Atlas traced a line with her finger. Because they don't need to be creative. They just need to be patient. We're outnumbered. Their best plan is time. She looked up at Cross. They'll try to break us with time. Cross didn't smile. Then we break their time. Atlas nodded. We make every hour expensive. We moved into position under darkness. The ridge was a long spine of rock and scrub, with a half-ruined stone wall running along its crest. Old farm boundary, maybe. It gave us just enough cover to set up firing positions and observation points. Atlas stayed in the makeshift command post we dug into the reverse slope. Sandbags, camo netting, a folding table, radios stacked like bricks. She wasn't safe back there. Nothing was safe. But she needed to see the whole board. I took an observation perch on the right shoulder with a spotter scope and a battered notebook. Rook posted a gun team near the center. Cross moved between positions like a ghost, checking every angle. By midnight, the main Allied force was moving out behind us. You could hear it. Engines, tracks, boots, the low sound of hundreds of people withdrawing under the cover of our rifles. And you could also hear something else. The enemy. Not in words. In pressure. In the way the air felt when something large was approaching. Atlas's voice came through my earpiece. "Eyes up," she said. "First probes in 10. I didn't ask how she knew. I just watched the valley. The darkness was thick, but not perfect. There was starlight, a faint glow from distant fires. Enough to catch movement if you knew what to look for. 10 minutes later, I saw it. Shapes. Low and cautious, moving in groups of 3 and 4. They weren't charging. They were testing, sending feelers into the valley to see where we were, how we responded. Rook's voice came through. "Contact low valley." Cross replied, calm. "Hold fire." Atlas cut in, precise. "Let them come closer. Don't show your full line." That's what she did for us. She kept our nerves from writing checks our ammo couldn't cash. We waited. The enemy crept closer. Then Atlas said, "Now." Rook's gun opened up in short, disciplined bursts. Not a spray. A message. The rounds stitched the ground in front of the enemy team and forced them to drop flat. The valley froze. Then the enemy pulled back, fast and embarrassed. Atlas's voice again, "Good. They know we're awake. Now they'll try a different angle." I swallowed, the taste of dust in my mouth. 2 days, I muttered. Rook answered like he'd heard me, even though he couldn't have. 2 days. The first indirect rounds came just before dawn. Not heavy artillery, mortars. Quick, portable, accurate enough to ruin your morning. The first shell landed behind the ridge, sending dirt and rock into the air. The second hit near our left shoulder, too close. The third landed dead center. Someone was walking their fire. They had spotters. Atlas's voice came calm as a surgeon. "Mortars, grid 3-2 Alpha. Likely spotter in the tree line. Drone up." A small quadcopter buzzed into the air from behind our line, disappearing into darkness. 10 seconds later, Atlas spoke again. "Spotter confirmed. Left tree line, near broken silo." Cross didn't hesitate. "Engage." 2 of our guys put rounds into the tree line, not to kill the spotter, but to make him move. The mortar fire shifted, sloppy now, losing accuracy. Atlas's voice sharpened slightly. "They'll adjust again. Expect second wave after sunrise." We all knew what that meant. Daylight. No more hiding. Daylight in war is like taking the lid off a boiling pot. Sunrise hit the valley like a dull blade. Light poured over the ridge, revealing everything we'd tried to keep invisible. Sandbags, firing slits, the outline of men who hadn't slept. The valley below looked deceptively peaceful in the morning light. It wasn't. Enemy forces began assembling in the low ground, more than the night probes. Groups, then platoons. A slow build-up, like a fist forming. Cross's voice came over net. "Everyone check ammo. Check water. This is going to be the long part." Atlas's voice followed, quieter. "Remember," she said, "we don't need to win today. We just need to exist. That's the thing people don't understand. Sometimes survival is the mission. Sometimes being unbroken is victory." And on that first morning, as the enemy's first real push began, I realized we were about to learn what 48 hours really cost. The first assault came with the sun fully up. Not all at once. That would have been merciful. It came in waves, measured, probing, patient. The enemy didn't rush us screaming. They advanced like men who knew time was on their side, like men who believed we would crack if they leaned long enough. They were wrong, but not about everything. The first push hit the low valley at 0810. Small arms first, rifle fire snapping and echoing up the slopes, followed by machine guns set to rake our center line. The sound wasn't chaotic. It was methodical, covering fire, bounding movement, discipline. Rook keyed his mic, they're testing center mass. Atlas answered immediately. Let them think that's where we are. Don't show the shoulders yet. That was her genius. She didn't fight the enemy where they were strong. She fought their expectations. We'd built false positions during the night. Sandbags, decoy firing points, heat signatures rigged with chemical packs that bloomed under optics. When they poured fire into our center, they were shooting ghosts. I watched from my perch as the enemy crept closer, hugging cover, moving cautiously. When they reached the kill line Atlas had marked hours earlier, she gave the word. Now, short and sharp, we opened up from the shoulders, right and left, crossing fire into the valley like closing scissors. The effect was immediate. Enemy fighters dropped, scrambled, pulled back hard. They hadn't expected resistance from angles they thought were empty. I heard Rook laugh once, short, sharp, then go quiet again. That was how the morning went. Push, pull back, adjust. By noon, the enemy had lost more men than they expected. But they didn't retreat. They adapted. At 1,300, the mortars came back, heavier this time. Not to kill us outright, but to wear us down. The rounds landed just close enough to shake your bones and remind you that the sky itself could decide you were finished. One shell hit near the command post. I felt the concussion even from my perch. HQ status? Cross snapped. There was a half-second of silence. Then Atlas came back, voice steady, breathing controlled. Still standing. One radio down. Switching to backup. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't swear. She just worked. And that calm traveled through the net like a sedative. We held through the afternoon. Through heat and dust and thirst that made your tongue feel like leather. We rationed water by the mouthful, ammo by the magazine. The enemy tried a feint on the right shoulder around 1600, sent a squad skirting wide, using terrain to mask their movement. Atlas caught it before they even made contact. Right side, shift Bravo element 50 meters upslope, she ordered. They're trying to climb behind you. We moved. When the enemy crested the ridge expecting an empty flank, they ran into muzzles already waiting. They pulled back again. At sunset, the valley went quiet. Too quiet. That's when the fear creeps in. Not loud, not dramatic, but subtle. The kind that asks questions you don't want to answer. How many do they have left? How many do we? What happens if tomorrow looks like today, but worse? Night fell like a blanket soaked in oil. And with it came the second phase. Night fighting is a different animal. Distances lie. Sounds deceive. Every shadow is a question mark with teeth. Atlas shifted us into night posture smoothly. IR discipline, reduced movement, drones rotated to preserve battery. She coordinated with allied fires far behind us, timing illumination flares so they looked random, not planned. Deception again. At 2300, they came from the trees. Not charging. Crawling. Low silhouettes slipping through dead ground, using folds in the terrain we hadn't thought mattered. They'd learned from the morning. They weren't probing anymore. They were committing. Multiple contacts. Tree line. I whispered into my mic. Atlas replied instantly. I see them. Hold until they cross the marker. The marker was imaginary. Only she knew where it was. They crossed it anyway. Engage. The night erupted. Tracer fire carved red lines through darkness. Grenades thumped and echoed. The smell of cordite mixed with damp earth. My rifle bucked against my shoulder as I fired controlled bursts into movement, into sound, into instinct. They came closer than the first wave. Too close. On the left shoulder, I heard a shout. Pain, not anger. Then Rook's voice, suddenly hard. Man down. That's when the story stopped being abstract. The casualty was Miller, young, solid, always joking. Shrapnel to the leg, bad bleed. We dragged him behind cover, hands slick with blood. He was conscious, teeth clenched, trying not to scream. Atlas was already there in my ear. Casualty location marked. Suppressing fire inbound. You have 90 seconds. 90 seconds. That's how long she bought us. Rook worked the tourniquet. Someone else covered. I fired until my barrel smoked. The enemy pushed again, sensing weakness. Atlas adjusted fires, pulling pressure off us just enough to let us breathe. Miller lived, but the cost was starting to show. By 0300, everyone was exhausted. Not sleepy worse. That hollow place behind the eyes where reaction time stretches and mistakes whisper your name. Atlas knew it. Micro-rest, she ordered over net. 30 seconds at a time. Rotate. I'll call you back. She wasn't sleeping. She couldn't. She was holding all of us in her head at once. Positions, ammo counts, morale, the clock ticking toward 48 hours like a sentence. At 0415, the enemy tried to cut our comms. A small team slipped wide, aiming for our relay antenna on the rear slope. If they took it, we'd be blind. No coordination, no deception. Atlas saw it coming. Rear element. You're about to have company, she said. Let them think they're winning. We pulled back deliberately, letting the enemy advance, letting them believe they'd found the weak seam. When they reached the antenna site, we closed the trap. The firefight was short and brutal. When it ended, the antenna still stood. So did we. Dawn crept in again, pale and unforgiving. Day 2 had begun. We were bruised, bleeding, and tired in ways that didn't show on the outside. But we were still the door. And Atlas's voice came through the net, steady as ever. Good work, she said. They're angry now. Cross answered quietly. Good. That morning, as the enemy regrouped for what we all knew would be the heaviest push yet, I looked back toward the command post. Atlas stood there, silhouetted against the early light, headset on, one hand resting on the map like she was keeping it from blowing away. Young, smart, calm, and carrying the weight of all of us. We still had hours to hold. And the hardest part was coming. Day 2 didn't announce itself. It just arrived, heavy and merciless, like a hand closing around your throat. The enemy didn't waste the morning with probing fire. They didn't test. They didn't feel. They came on like men who had decided that losses were acceptable, as long as the math ended in our erasure. Atlas said it before anyone else did. They're done waiting. Her voice was calm, but there was no softness in it now. Calm didn't mean gentle. It meant precise. At 0730, indirect fire began again. Denser, tighter, walking up the ridge in deliberate increments. They weren't guessing anymore. They'd mapped us through blood and patience. Shells burst close enough to rattle teeth. One landed near my perch, showering me with dirt and rock. I tasted iron and realized my lip was split. Rook's voice came through the net, controlled but strained. Ammo's dropping fast. Atlas replied instantly. I know. We stretch it. No hero fire. Only confirmed targets. Cross added, we don't break. None of us answered. We didn't need to. The first wave hit at 0815. Not from the valley. From the left shoulder. They'd learned. They surged out of the tree line in numbers we hadn't seen yet. 2 full elements, moving aggressively, using smoke to mask their advance. Machine guns opened up behind them, suppressing our known firing points. I fired until my rifle felt like it was breathing fire. Targets fell. More took their place. Atlas's voice cut through the chaos. Left shoulder, fall back to secondary line. Now, that order hurt. We dug those positions. Bled for them. Letting go felt like losing ground in your soul. But Atlas wasn't retreating. She was trading space for time. We pulled back 50 meters, then another 30, collapsing inward while the enemy surged into positions that no longer mattered. When they crested what they thought was a victory, they walked into interlocking fire from angles they didn't expect. The fight turned savage. Close. Loud. Personal. I saw a Rook drag a wounded man out of a blast crater with one arm while firing with the other. I saw Cross take a round to the plate carrier and keep moving like nothing had happened. And I saw Atlas do something that still tightens my chest when I think about it. The command post took a direct hit. Not a full shell, fragmentation. Enough to shred the camo netting and collapse part of the sandbag wall. Dust and smoke filled the air. For half a second, the net went silent. Every one of us felt it. Cross shouted into his mic. HQ respond. Static. My stomach dropped. Then Atlas. Coughing once. Then steady. Still here, she said. One wounded. Radio intact. Stay focused. She didn't say it loudly. She didn't say it dramatically. She said it like someone who refused to let panic exist. The wounded was her calm specialist, shrapnel to the shoulder. Bleeding, but alive. Atlas applied pressure with one hand while coordinating fire missions with the other. I'm not exaggerating. I watched it through binoculars. Blood on her sleeve. Eyes locked on the map. Voice never wavering. That's when I understood something important. She wasn't just our hope. She was our anchor. By midday, the enemy had pushed us back to our final defensive line. We were out of fallback positions. Out of comfort. Out of illusions. Ammo was critically low. Water nearly gone. Everyone was wounded in some way. Even if it was just cuts, bruises, burns. Atlas called us all up on the net. Listen to me, she said. They think we're done. They think this is the end of us. She paused, not for effect, but because she was checking something. Then she continued. Allied forces are moving. They're closer than the enemy believes. We don't need to defeat them. Her voice sharpened. We need to hold. Someone, maybe me, asked the question we were all thinking. How long? Atlas didn't hesitate. 6 hours, she said. Maybe less. 6 hours. After 42 already spent. I leaned my forehead against my rifle and laughed once, quietly. 6 hours might as well have been forever. The final assault began at 14:30. No subtlety. No patience. They came screaming this time. Not from rage, but from certainty. They believed we were broken. That belief made them careless. Atlas used that. She coordinated the last of our indirect fires. Not to kill, but to channel. She shaped the battlefield like water through rock, forcing the enemy into narrow approaches where numbers worked against them. Every round mattered now. Every decision echoed. At 1600, Rook was hit. Hard. Shoulder, chest, knocked flat by the blast. We dragged him behind cover, slapped a bandage on him, got him breathing. He waved us off. Not today, he growled. Get back up. Atlas rerouted fire to cover our center. At 1700, Cross was down to his last magazine. So was I. So was everyone. The ridge was a ruin. Smoke, blood, torn earth. The enemy was closer than they'd ever been. Close enough that I could see faces. That's when Atlas made her final call. She keyed every channel at once. All elements, she said. Prepare to counter. There was silence. Then Cross asked, counter what? Atlas's voice was steel now. There's certainty. She'd been watching them the whole time. Watching patterns. Watching confidence grow where caution used to live. She knew when they thought they'd won. They'll commit everything in the next push, she said. When they do, we move forward. Not back. I remember thinking she was insane. Then I remembered who she was. We waited. The enemy surged again, this time in force, pouring up the ridge, screaming, firing wildly. Atlas's voice cut through it. Now, we rose as one. We didn't charge. We advanced. Controlled. Disciplined. Relentless. The enemy hadn't expected it. They stumbled. Hesitated. Lost momentum. And then, the sound I will never forget. Artillery. Friendly. Heavy. Landing behind the enemy line. The valley erupted. Allied forces had returned. Right on time. When it ended suddenly. The enemy broke and fled. The ridge went quiet except for the ringing in our ears and the sound of our own breathing. Atlas sank to one knee behind the command table, headset hanging loose. Blood streaked her sleeve. Her hands shook, for the first time in 2 days. Cross walked to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. Held, he said simply. She nodded once. We sat there as the sun dipped low, watching friendly forces move back into the valley we'd denied. 48 hours. We'd given them that. And more. People ask me why we remember her. Why her name comes up when we talk about that ridge. It's not because she was young, or beautiful, or brilliant. It's because when time tried to kill us, she stood in front of it and said, "No, wars don't end when the shooting stops. They end later, sometimes years later, when your body finally believes it's allowed to breathe again." The ridge fell quiet as Allied armor rolled past us, engines growling, antennas swaying like tall grass in the wind. Medics moved in fast, efficient, gentle in the way only people who've seen too much know how to be. We sat where we were. No one cheered. No one spoke. We just stayed still, because moving meant admitting it was over. Atlas remained at the command post, helmet off now, hair matted with dust and sweat, eyes hollow with exhaustion. She stared at the map like it might still demand something from her. Cross crouched beside her. "You did it," he said. She didn't look up. "We did." Cross nodded. "They're saying the counteroffensive broke through clean. Minimal losses on the withdrawal. That was the real victory, not our survival. Theirs." Atlas finally leaned back, closing her eyes for a second too long. Her hands trembled openly now, adrenaline bleeding out of her system like a slow leak. Rook was stretchered past us, grinning despite the blood soaking his bandage. "Hey, Atlas," he called weakly. "Next time, let's hold for one day." She smiled at that. A real smile. Small, tired, human. We were pulled off the ridge that night. Not because we wanted to leave, but because there was nothing left for us to give. Our position was no longer critical. Our job was done. As we moved down, I looked back once. The ridge didn't look heroic. It looked torn apart, scarred, spent, just like us. Back at base, the world tried to return to normal faster than we were ready for. Clean uniforms, hot food, quiet nights. Debriefs came and went. Names were written down, numbers recorded, lines drawn in reports that would eventually be classified, archived, and forgotten by anyone who hadn't been there. Atlas sat through every debrief without asking for credit. She corrected details, clarified timelines, made sure the story was accurate. Not flattering, accurate. At the end of the final briefing, a colonel shook her hand and said something about exceptional leadership under fire. She nodded politely, then went back to checking on the wounded. I saw her again months later. Different base, different mission, same calm. We stood outside a hangar watching helicopters lift into the dusk. "You ever think about that ridge?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. "Yes," she said, "but not the way people expect." "How's that?" She looked at the sky, where the last light faded into dark. "I don't think about what we did," she said. "I think about what didn't happen." I nodded. That made sense. Years have passed now. I'm out. My knees hate the cold. My hands shake when I've had too much coffee. I tell stories like this because some of them deserve to be told properly. People ask me what courage looks like. They expect something loud. I tell them about a young woman in a field command post, blood on her sleeve, voice steady on the radio, holding time itself at bay while an entire force found its footing again. They ask if she was afraid. Of course she was. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's staying clear-headed when fear wants control. Atlas didn't shout. She didn't grandstand. She didn't make speeches. She coordinated. She endured. She held. And because she did, hundreds of others walked away alive. That's the kind of bravery that doesn't end up in movies. But it's the kind that wins wars. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Epic Recon Stories. Here we tell the missions that never made the headlines, the decisions made in silence, and the people who carried them. More stories are coming soon.